Hi, everyone. Welcome to this introduction to the carbon calculator on behalf of Robertson. My name is Estefania Chica. I'm a carbon consultant at the Supply Chain School. And part of my role here involves helping companies calculate their carbon emissions and also developing strategies to help them reduce their impact on the planet. Today's session will cover important aspects of Robertson's own journey towards net zero. And we'll also introduce a platform called the Carbon Calculator, which is going to help you as a supplier to understand your own carbon impact as well. So here's the agenda that we have prepared for you today. Martin and Abby from Robertson will open up the session, giving you a bit of context behind this request. I will then explain some carbon terminology that is going to help you understand where emissions come from and how you can start calculating them. And finally, I'm going to focus on the carbon calculator, which is the platform I mentioned earlier. This is the tool that is going to help you calculate your carbon footprint as a business in a very easy way. So without further ado, over to you, Martin.
Good morning. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join our webinar, which we are running this morning in conjunction with Supply Chain Sustainability School. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Martin Dick, Robertson Group Procurement Supply Chain Director. Today's webinar will be recorded and made available after we finish. We will look to be finished by 12 noon, and if time allows, we will provide the opportunity for you to ask questions. However, due to the number of people being on today, we would ask that you raise all questions through the chat facility. This will enable us to make sure that we can put together a response to all questions raised, even if we don't manage to get an answer to them on the call. We will spend the next hour or so giving you an introduction to our Carbon Footprint Plus programme and how this will continue to develop our commitment to reduce emissions and support you, our supply chain, in doing the same, taking us another step closer to assuring a sustainable future. We are seeing a growing demand for carbon reporting as an additional tool that can be used for carbon reduction, influencing how we approach our own ESG efforts and that of our suppliers and supply chain. As a business, we have an obligation to address industry and customer requirements to reduce the emissions output in the products and services we procure. During the presentation today, you will hear reference made to Scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions, each of which have a unique characteristic, and hopefully by the end of this webinar, we will have explained the meaning of each and how they play a part in supporting our ability to fully understand the impact we have on the environment as a business. As a responsible business, we have both a moral and industry obligation to make practical steps to reduce emissions we produce at every opportunity. To assist us in achieving this, we need to be able to capture information to help us to identify what our main emission hotspots are, so as we can work collaboratively to identify solutions to reduce that and ultimately remove those from our operational activities. If you want to change slide, please. Our Carbon Footprint Plus programme has been developed to support you, our supply chain, to capture this information as you play an integral part in our ability to achieve our goals and prepare for future legislative changes, which are anticipated as we approach wider government target deadlines. Whilst this programme will look to support our journey at Robertson, it should be noted that this is an industry-wide requirement. And through the support of the Supply Chain Sustainability School, we are aligned with our fellow Tier 1 contractors to provide you with both training and support, which will enable you to identify your major contributing factors and what can be done within your business to address these issues. We are taking a three-phase approach to the rollout of this programme with Robertson's. Phase 1 being you, our preferred supply chain members. Phase 2 will see us address our strategic subcontract partners. And Phase 3 will see this being rolled out across the remainder of our supply chain. I would like to once again thank you for your time today, and I'll now hand over to Abby McKinnon, our Group Supply Chain Sustainability Coordinator, who will take you through some of the finer details.
Morning all. As Martin said, I'm Abby. I'm the Group Supply Chain Sustainability Coordinator at Robertson. Just want to thank you all for being on this today we really value the continuous engagement with our preferred supply chain and understand the part that we all need to play in trying to achieve these net zero targets. So thanks for that. Just a wee bit of context on our responsible business strategy. Within that, we have 2030 objectives governing people, our partners, and the planet. We've already started tracking our emissions and then are looking to venture out into the emissions of our supply chain. But we've done a few activities to address our emissions, as you can see on the screen. So we have things like a sustainability scorecard. This will help continuous improvement in all our Robertson sites. We'll use this at each stage of a project just to see what's happening on them, how we can make them more sustainable. We also have a 2030 carbon management plan that is accessible for all our staff and teams to delve into. About 2 weeks ago, we launched our nature positive approach. So we're really placing value on enhancing the ecosystems and the biodiversity surrounding our projects and any influence and impact that our projects may have on that. And last year we achieved gold membership of the Plant Charter through the Supply Chain Sustainability School. We also have a net zero fleet approach aimed at reducing emissions that we can control. So about 70% of our company vehicles are electric, and any new orders that we place will be fully electric or hybrid. And we also encourage the use of alternative fuels, so things like HVO that we'll use on sites, anything to try and lower the emissions on our sites. Could we have the next slide, please, Steph? So we are really delving into carbon reduction. We've already started looking at the emissions that we can control. So our scope 1 and 2 emissions that Steph will explain a bit better than myself. We benchmarked these in 2014-15 and we've re-benchmarked since to then identify emissions hotspots and target our reduction methods, which we're hoping this process will help yourselves do, and we are more than happy to support, and vice versa. We already capture some scope 3 emissions, including things like waste and employee travel, but now we're looking to the supply chain to identify what emissions will come from that and try and make our supply chain, especially our preferred supply chain, as sustainable as possible. By recording our scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, like I says, the ones that we have a wee bit more control over, we have got a whole lot of opportunities from this. We've managed to reduce our emissions quite significantly, and we became climate positive by emissions reductions and offsetting. So we're just looking to now bring in the supply chain into that equation. We have a wee video that we'd created for Robertson's journey on these carbon reduction measures. If Steph could pop that on, and hopefully it will explain a bit better than I can.
At Robertson, our purpose is to assure a sustainable future. The climate and biodiversity crisis is one of the biggest challenges the planet will ever face. Globally, carbon is a huge problem. In the UK, the built environment is responsible for producing roughly 40% of total carbon emissions. These emissions, along with other greenhouse gases, contribute to the rising global temperature and extreme weather events. The challenge has been set. We need to reverse the rise in global temperature to prevent a devastating impact on our planet. Robertson is actively addressing our carbon emissions and the environmental impact from our operations. And in order for our efforts to be targeted, we use carbon emissions scopes to measure the impact of our activities. Scope 1 covers the direct emissions created from our activities. These come from the fuel used on site to power generators and plant, or the gas we use to heat our offices and factory. Scope 2 deals with indirect emissions that come from the production of the electricity or heat we use, like lighting our offices or powering our IT equipment. Scope 3 encompasses indirect emissions from all the other activities we engage in, including the emissions associated with manufacturing and delivery of the materials and products that we buy, and waste generated through our processes. It is not unusual for Scope 3 to be greater than Scope 1 and 2 combined. We already count many aspects of our Scope 3 emissions, but now we want to monitor and reduce emissions across our entire supply chain. To deliver upon this, we have today launched the Robertson Carbon Footprint Plus approach. where we require our suppliers to provide and apportion their carbon emissions data in relation to the work they do for us, enabling us to better monitor the impact of our activities. This allows us to work with our customers and suppliers to deliver targeted decarbonisation support, enabling us to track and report on the continuous improvement that, collectively, we are making. If we are to succeed in assuring a sustainable future, we need to assist our customers and supply chain on their journeys to net zero. This means we need to continue to minimise our own carbon emissions, which over the last 10 years have been significantly reduced. By 2030, our aim is to generate zero emissions from our offices, commercial fleet, and the construction sites within our control. We are making positive inroads. Over 70% of our company car fleet is EV, and through our carbon management plan, we are further reducing carbon emissions while diverting over 99% of construction waste from landfill. We are committed to supporting activities that remove carbon from the atmosphere. Currently, we are climate positive and are using nature-based removal approaches. We also offset more emissions than we generate and will continue to do so while we investigate innovative new carbon removal technologies. As a net zero contractor of choice, we will guide our customers towards the best solutions to reduce their embodied carbon, the CO2 emissions associated with their materials and construction, and their operational carbon, generated once they are in use. And by maintaining our close working relationships with our supply chain, together we will monitor and reduce emissions. Our Carbon Footprint Plus approach will support us as we address and minimize the impact of the built environment on the climate and biodiversity crisis. We all have a role to play and responsibility to take. Together, we will assure a sustainable future. At Robertson, our purpose is to assure us.
So hopefully that video has contextualized the Carbon Footprint Plus approach a wee bit more for you, and the video will be available after this webinar for you to view. Essentially, we're delving into the emissions in our supply chain, and the video should give a justification to that. On to timelines. We require your emissions data for your previous financial year, and the deadline for this emissions data is Friday the 7th of June, so in 3 months' time. If there's any issues at all, just contact myself at Robertson, and if you have any issues signing up or using the school, Lorraine is the person to contact for that. And the carbon calculator itself and the software, there's a wee email address just there. Feel free to contact them, and hopefully they'll iron out any issues. But yes, thank you for joining us on this today, and I'll hand it back to Steph.
Thank you very much, Abby and Martin as well. I'm sure this gave everyone a bit more clarity on why Robertson are starting to measure emissions in the supply chain. As mentioned in the video, emissions from the value chain are quite significant, and if we really want to achieve our climate commitments, it is important that we work together with suppliers to understand the carbon emissions embedded in our supply chains. I would like to begin by introducing some carbon terminology that is used whenever we speak about carbon emissions. You heard this terminology during the video, so hopefully I'm just going to echo that explanation. So according to the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which is essentially the Bible for carbon accounting, the emissions are classified into 3 categories or scopes, which are scopes 1, 2, and 3. This is probably the most important concept in carbon accounting, so please do bear with me here, and I'll give a couple of examples of what that entails. So scope 1 emissions, which are the ones here in the middle of the diagram, are the ones generated from the sources that you own and control. For example, your boilers, your own fleet vehicles. These are also called direct emissions. So What are some other examples of Scope 1 emissions? So as I said, emissions generated from driving your company's vehicles, emissions generated from the fuel to operate your own plant and equipment, any fugitive emissions, etc. Those are examples of Scope 1 emissions. On the other hand, Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions are examples of indirect emissions. So let's talk about Scope 2 first, here on the left-hand side. So Scope 2 refers to your electricity consumption only. Those emissions are caused indirectly by your consumption of electricity, and therefore you're indirectly responsible for them. Any other indirect emission besides electricity would fall under your own Scope 3. And these emissions can happen upstream, as you can see on the left-hand side, or downstream, as you can see on the right-hand side. What is the difference between upstream and downstream Scope 3 emissions? Well, basically, upstream is everything you need to produce your products. For example, the material that you buy from your suppliers, any water that you consume, any waste generated during your operations, employee commuting, etc. Whereas downstream Scope 3 is everything related to the consumption of your products once you sell them. For example, any downstream transportation and distribution, any end of life treatment of those products would fall under this category. So as you can see, Scope 3 is quite a big category. It's actually subdivided into 15 small categories, which are the ones you can see here, but not all those categories correspond to all organizations, okay? So you might not need to collect data for all of this. The main message here is that to provide a really transparent overview of your carbon emissions, you need to include your Scope 3. And that is essentially why Robertson has called you today. As suppliers, you would fall under the Scope 3 category of Robertson. And for them to achieve net zero, they would need to have a deep understanding of the carbon emissions embedded in their supply chain. So one key step to for this process is to actually start measuring emissions across suppliers. So to help organizations like yours calculate your own carbon emissions, we designed the Carbon Calculator, which is an online platform that is going to help you calculate your own emissions and also distribute a percentage of those emissions across your clients like Robertson. This calculator is completely free for you to use, and it really simplifies the reporting process for you. What does that mean? Well, on the screen right now, you're basically seeing the formula to calculate carbon emissions, which lots of companies do manually. However, with the carbon calculator, you don't have to do any of these calculations yourself. The system will do that for you. What you need to do is to provide information about certain activities, for example, how much electricity you use, how much diesel you consume, how much petrol you consume, and other data points that I'm going to share later. And then based on this information, the platform will tell you the amount of emissions that you have generated. Believe me, this is going to save you lots of time and energy because you're not doing these calculations manually, which is a very time-consuming process. Just to give you a bit of context on the carbon calculator, at the moment, we have almost 1,000 supplier companies using this platform to report their own emissions. And that is because they have been invited by their customers to do so. So if you're part of the supply chain of any of the companies on the screen, including Robertson, you are required to calculate your emissions via the carbon calculator. What can you expect from this platform? Well, these are the key things that you should know about the calculator before I show you a live demo of the platform. So first of all, as the name implies, this platform calculates carbon emissions based on the activity that you provide, which means that the more data you input in the system, the more accurate your footprint is going to be. So please keep that in mind when you're submitting your information. Secondly, The calculator helps you distribute emissions across your clients, such as Robertson, based on the percentage of revenue. I'm going to pause here for a bit to give you an example. If Robertson represents 10% of your revenue, you can attribute 10% of your total emissions to them. Okay, this process is called apportionment, and you can do it via the calculator in a couple of seconds. So I will demo how that works as well. Another thing you need to know is that there are two types of reporting methods in the carbon calculator, and you need to select the one that is applicable to your organization. Okay, so the first one is what we call the simplified report. And that report was designed for supplier companies who already know your carbon emissions. Okay, so if that's your case, if you already know your carbon emissions, you simply need to select the simplified report and input your scope 1, 2, and 3 figures. Okay, so it's really short and simple. On the other hand, if you don't know your carbon footprint yet, you need to select the long form, and that will give you access to several tabs that need to be filled out. Okay. Very important for you to know, data only needs to be reported once a year. As Abby mentioned, the June is the deadline to submit information for your last reporting period. And this is to make the process as simple as possible for you. We understand that asking you to provide data on a monthly basis would be a huge burden for organizations. So we're only asking you to provide this information once a year. And finally, once you submit your information, you will access your own dashboard. So you can start tracking your carbon emissions over time for free. And what you're seeing on the screen right now is an example of the dashboards that will be generated in your account. Again, depending on the information that you provide in the system, you could have a breakdown of emissions by source or by scope. You will be able to understand what your scope 1, 2, and 3 is, and also what your carbon hotspots are. Another important thing to mention here is that your account as a company, as a supplier, is private. Okay, you own that account, and that account can be used for your own benefits. As Martin and Abby mentioned earlier, carbon is becoming really, really important in this industry, and there is an expectation for companies to understand their own carbon impacts, which you can do via the carbon calculator. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to show you how to access the system, what kind of information you need to submit, and also the support and the materials that we've developed to help you in this process. Okay. So I'd like to start from the very beginning, and hopefully you are seeing this. As I said, the carbon calculator is an online platform. So the website to access the calculator is carbon.sustainabilitytool.com. Okay. From the landing page, which is what I'm showing you right now, you can access you can create your own account. So as you can see, there is an option here that reads create a supplier account. So please click there to create your own. The registration process is really, really simple. It's exactly what you're seeing on the screen right now. You will simply need to add your name, your email address, a password, and also your company name. Please try to type the whole name of your company. Avoid acronyms because that makes it really hard for us to identify your company among the several hundred of companies that we have in the system. I want to go through the registration process because it's very simple, but I just wanted to show you how to access that part. Now I'm coming back to the landing page of the calculator to show you how you can access all the video tutorials and all the reports and the guides that we've created to help you in this process. So what you need to do is to click here, measure your own emissions, and this is what you will see. we've created several videos to explain how the calculator works, how you can register, how you can distribute part of your emissions to Robertson, which is called apportionment, how to navigate your dashboards. So I'd like to point out some of those resources very quickly. So for example, if you would like to see how to register in the carbon calculator, this is the video that you should be accessing. These are very short videos, 2 to 3 minutes max. So you can select exactly what you need. Another, I think, important video for you would be this video on mastering data apportionment. So this is going to explain you how to do the apportionment part of the submission. I'm going to scroll down, and you will see that for each tab or for each section of the carbon calculator, we have developed a short explanatory video. So if you're struggling with a particular section in the system, simply come back to the landing page and check the guide that we've created for you. And I'm just going to scroll down because there are two very important documents that I'm sure will help you in this journey, especially if this is the very first time that you're going to do a carbon footprinting exercise. So the first one, it's our new guide called the Carbon Calculator Guide. This has important information on the kinds of information that you need to collect, the kind of data that you need to collect, where you can find that information, and also what to do if you're missing some of that information, okay? What are some of the strategies and some of the ways to compensate for that data that you're missing? So it's quite an interesting guide. And the one here at the top, which is called Metrics Guide, this is an Excel file that will give you a summary of all the data points that are part of the system. So you can see very quickly what you need to start collecting. I hope that is clear. As I said, we've taken the time to develop lots and lots of guides for you. But if you require further assistance or you have an issue with the system or any particular questions about reporting, you can contact info@sustainabilitytool.com. There is a team monitoring those requests, so feel free to contact them for any help you might require. So that being said, I would like to show you how the sustainability tool looks like. So once you register and you create your account, the first thing that you will see is this apportionment window, okay, which has two sections. The first section is asking, do you already know your organization's carbon emissions? The default option is no, but if you are an organization who already know your scopes 1, 2, and 3, you can select yes, and you will be taken to the short report where you can simply input your final figures, okay? However, if you don't know your carbon footprint and would like to use a calculator to do it, then the right option is no, which is a default option. The second part of this pop-up is called apportionment. What is apportionment? It's basically distributing a percentage of your emissions across your clients based on turnover, okay? So what you need to do here is to, from this drop-down list, to select Robertson. So I'm going to scroll down. You might have more than one client from this list, by the way, so feel free to select as many as you need to. So I'm going to click Robertson for this example, and then you need to add the percentage of revenue that Robertson represents to your business. I said it earlier, if Robertson represents 10% of your revenue, then you need to add 10% here, okay? And then you select add. This percentage is really important because it basically generates the emissions or calculates the emissions that you will send to Robertson's account. So please make sure that the percentage is correct. You might need to check this information with your colleagues in your finance departments, for example. So once you complete this, you select save and then you close. The first step is to please check here at the very top that you are reporting data for the right period, okay? So we are in 2024, the previous period is 2023. So just make sure you're selecting the right year. And then down below, you will see a series of tabs with information that we're asking you to provide. This information will help you calculate your scope 1, your scope 2, and part of your scope 3, okay? Also, the data that we're asking you to provide here is your overall data as an organization, okay? We're not asking you to provide only the data that corresponds to Robertson. We're asking you to provide your overall data as an organization, because the system will later on calculate what corresponds to Robertson, so you don't have to worry about that part. Okay, so let's speak about the first section, which is transport. The first section of transport refers to company transport. If you hover over the information icon, you can have further information, but essentially we're asking you how many miles you have traveled using your own vehicles. So what you can see here is the list of different vehicle types, the most commonly used, for example, diesel cars, petrol vans, diesel vans. And what you need to add is the number of miles that you've traveled using those vehicles in a year. So I'm just going to type a random number. Let's say that I, in my company, traveled 1,000 miles in a diesel car, okay? You can do the same with the rest of options. However, if one of these options doesn't correspond to your organization, for example, let's say that in my organization, I don't own any vans. So what I need to do is to select NA, and that will gray out the field. This step is very important because if you don't select NA, but also you don't fill it in, you won't be able to submit the report, okay? Now, the second part of the transport tab refers to third-party transport. So this is any transport in vehicles not owned by your organizations. And an example of this might be any third-party delivery that you have hired for your products, okay? That would fall under this category. Also, this category includes other modes of transport, such as train, plane, buses, etc. So the logic is the same. I'm asking how many miles you have traveled in any of these vehicle types. So let's say that you've traveled 2,000 miles on a petrol car, and that everything else is not applicable to you. So you can simply select NA. If you have information about buses, planes, trains, you simply select yes to this question, and you will be able to select that option from a drop-down list. Once you fill in this tab, you can select mark section as complete, and you move on to the next one, which is fossil fuels. This tab refers to your consumption of fuels, usually for the plant and equipment that you might operate in your organization. So again, what you have here is the list of the most commonly used fuels. For example, diesel, hydrotreated vegetable oil, which is a biofuel, natural gas, petrol, gas oil, etc. If you consume any of these fuels, please add the quantity here. The unit of measurement is already stated in the system, and it cannot be changed. So please, when you're inputting numbers, just make sure you're using the right unit of measurement. If you're collecting your own data using another unit, please make sure to convert that outside of the system before inputting those numbers. That is one of the most common errors that we have found in data submissions, using the wrong units of measurement. So let's say that in my organization, I've used 500 liters of diesel and maybe 1,000 liters of hydrotreated vegetable oil, or HVO. If the rest is not applicable to you, you can select NA to gray out those fields. I also wanted to mention here that some organizations do not collect data on miles traveled. So for the transport section that we spoke about before, if that is your case, if you don't collect data on distance traveled, but you know how much petrol and how much diesel is going into your vehicles, then you can use the fossil fuels tab instead, okay? And you can add information on diesel and petrol on this tab. But it has to be one or the other when it comes to transport. You either input the distance traveled or you input the amount of fuel. Once you finish, again, you select mark section as complete and you move on to fugitive emissions. So fugitive emissions refers to any unintentional leakages of greenhouse gases, and this is usually coming from the refrigerants that you use in your air conditioning systems, for example. If you have this information, select yes and add the quantity of refrigerant. But if you don't have this information, simply select no, mark section as complete, and move on. Now we're moving on to electricity. Remember, electricity would constitute your scope 2 emissions. What we really want to know here is how many kilowatt hours of electricity you have consumed. And in this case, you can just add a number. Right here, I've just added a random number. And then we have two additional questions. Do you purchase renewable energy from your grid energy supplier? So you can say, yes, I purchase grid energy. And if that's the case, add the number of kilowatt hours. Do you generate renewable energy on site? Let's say that you don't. So simply select no. This is information that you can find in your electricity bill or in your electric meter readings, okay? So simply mark section as complete and move on to the next section. Every single section after this one, so starting from materials until almost the end, would fall under your scope 3 emissions, okay? I need to warn you, these sections are a little bit more difficult to collect data for, but try to fill this in to the best of your ability. So for example, the section of materials is asking whether you manufacture products or materials from raw materials. So if you do that, select yes, and then from this drop-down list, select the raw material, okay? So some of the options are aluminum, cement, clay, concrete, copper, gypsum, glass, etc., etc. These are the most commonly used construction materials in the built environment sector. So let's say that in your case, you have used a lot of steel. What you need to do is to select the raw material and then add the quantity in tons. Remember to use the unit of measurement established by the platform. So let's say that you've used 21 tons of steel. You can select as many materials as you need to from here. The second question is quite similar, but this is asking, do you use or handle materials in your day-to-day operations? So the idea here is to distinguish those suppliers who actually produce or make a product versus those suppliers that simply handle products and they don't really do any manufacturing, okay? Once you complete this, select mark section as complete and move on to waste. The question is, do you have information on waste? You can select yes, and then you will see several sub-questions. These questions are classifying waste into different types of waste. For example, refuse waste, plastic waste, paper and board waste, construction waste. So you need to select the type or types that correspond to your organization. In my case, let's say that the waste that I generate is mainly paper and board waste. So I would select yes for paper and board waste. And then I need to decide what the destination of that waste is. For example, has it been sent to landfill? Has it been recycled? Has it been incinerated? And those options will be found here on this drop-down list. So let's say that most of my waste has been combusted. So I'm going to select paper paper and board combusted, and I'm going to add the quantity. So let's say 1.2 tons. Something else that I wanted to highlight is that next to each metric, you have this comment area. You can actually input any comments here. I'm just going to type something. And you can use this area to make any clarifications or make any notes about data. If you're using any specific methodology to come up with that number, then use the comment area to explain what that methodology was. You will be asked to report this data every year, and next year you might not remember how you came up with those figures. So having a record of how you calculated those amounts or the source of that data, for example, saying that this information was gathered from your waste subcontractor, those kind of things would be really helpful for when you have to do this again. Now we're moving on to water, which is very, very short. We simply need to know how many liters of water you have consumed in a year. So let's say that you have consumed 1,200. So you simply add that here. We're moving on to the next one, which is called other emissions. Other emissions is a tab that we designed to give people the opportunity to add in any other emissions that might not be part of the system. So just to give you an example of that, something that we are not covering in the system at the moment are emissions from working from home. So if you're an organization who already know emissions from teleworking and you would like to add them here, you simply select yes, and then you add the number of emissions. So for example, let's say that 2 tons of carbon equivalent were or represent your working from home emissions. Please use the comment area to explain where that is coming from. You could say something, this represents home working. Okay, this is just for us to understand what is it that you're adding as an extra field. Just make sure that you're adding this information into the right bucket. In this case, working from home could fall under scope 3. Now, moving on, we have this tab called Policies and Strategies. This is very simple. This is a set of 6 questions that are designed to understand where you are in your carbon journey. Examples of those questions are, do you have carbon reduction targets? Do you have any science-based targets for your organization? Do you use any offsetting scheme, etc.? So you simply select yes and no. For some of those questions, you have the ability to upload evidence, okay? So just make sure that if you're selecting yes, you're uploading evidence to back that up. And the last tab is called company information, and it has 2 questions only. The first one is your turnover in this period. The unit, as you can see here, is sterling pounds, and you can simply input your turnover here. This is your overall turnover as an organization. This is not referring to the business activities with Robertson, okay? Another thing that I'm going to mention here is that if your turnover is in millions of pounds, please input the entire number. I've seen previous submissions that read 2 and then they type million here. That is a mistake, yeah, that would really mess up some of those calculations. So just make sure you're adding the actual number. If it's 2 million, then add 2 million. And the second question is, how many employees do you have in your organization for that particular year? So let's say that in your organization you have 100. Once you complete this very last section, mark section as complete and you're ready to submit, okay? I'm not gonna submit this data because as you saw, I didn't add data for all of it. Once you submit, the system will generate some dashboards, and it will give you some data analytics for you to understand your own scopes 1, 2, and 3. Here is an example of that. For this dummy account, this is a breakdown of scopes 1, 2, and 3. If I hover over, I can see that my scope 1 were 599 tons, that my scope 2 were 1,000 tons, etc. This is dummy data. You can use these dashboards to explore your data further. For example, if you want to see data by activity, you click here and you can understand where the emissions are coming from. Are they coming from company transports? Are they coming from the use of fuels, or maybe your water consumption or your electricity consumption? So that is something that you will be able to interrogate through these dashboards. What I usually do is looking at the indicator that has the highest number. So in this example, that is emissions from electricity, right? That has the highest number. So that is already a carbon hotspot for my organization. If I look at the second highest number, it's this one, well-to-tank emissions. You can click on any of those indicators, and the system will generate some graphs that will enable you to track your data over time. So this graph right here is showing you data on a year-by-year basis. I only have data for 2019 in this dummy account, so that's why you're seeing only one bar. But if you start to submit data for several years, you will be able to see your own trends as well. So that is how the calculator works. I hope this made sense. Please make use of the resources that we've created for you, especially if it's the first time that you're undertaking a carbon footprinting exercise. We created those guides based on the most common questions that we get from suppliers. And I'm sure that's going to be really helpful in this process. Now, what I'm going to do is coming back to my slides. Just to talk a little bit about data collection. Because that is one of the most common questions that I get from businesses. What kind of information do I need to collect, and where can I find these data? You will have a very detailed guide on where you can find this information, but just to give you a couple of examples, in order to calculate your scope 1, you will need data on your company transport. So we're talking about the number of miles traveled and the type of vehicle. We're also talking about the fuel that you use in your own organization. We are talking about fugitive emissions, in case you have that information. That is about the refrigerant that you use in your heating and air conditioning equipments. When we talk about scope 2, we are referring to your electricity consumption, okay? That's information that you can get in your electricity bill. When we talk about scope 3, we're talking about a few things, including materials. So if you use any materials, we need to know what material and the quantity. If you have any third-party transport, that would fall under this category as well. And similar to company transport, what we need to know is the distance traveled. Water also falls under scope 3. What we need to know is how many liters of water you've consumed. And with waste, we need to understand what type of waste you've generated, the quantity, and the destination. In the example that I gave earlier, we talked about waste, the destination of that waste. Was it composted? Was it sent to landfill? Was it combusted, etc.? Finally, and just to close off the session and kind of look at the questions that you've added in the chat, I wanted to give you some tips to make the most out of the calculator, and also to avoid the most common mistakes that I've seen from users. So please stay with me here. The first tip that I have for you is to please remember that you need to provide your overall organizational data, okay? You're not asked to provide the data that corresponds to Robertson only. You need to provide your overall organizational data. The system will then calculate what corresponds to Robertson, so you don't have to worry about that. Number two is about allocation. So through the carbon calculator, you can distribute a percentage of those emissions to Robertson, and that is based on revenue or turnover. If Robertson represents 10% of your revenue, you can allocate 10% of your emissions to them. That is called apportionment, and it is the pop-up window that I showed earlier. Number three, if you don't have data for every single field in the carbon calculator, that is totally fine. But I would suggest you focus on your key areas. What is your key areas? Scope 1 and 2 should be your minimum requirement. So that includes company transport, it includes fuel use, fugitive emissions, electricity, and then the other scope 3 areas, please try to fill them in to the best of your ability. Number 4, again, quite relevant, make sure you're selecting the right period at the top of the screen. Because once you submit a report, you want to be able to make changes on your own. You will need to contact us to make some changes, which makes the process a little bit more difficult. So please make sure you're selecting the corresponding year at the top. Number 5, when you input information, make sure you're using the right unit of measurement. You saw that next to each field, the system is indicating the unit of measurement. So when we talk about diesel, it is liters. When we talk about electricity, it is kilowatt hours. If you are collecting your data using a different unit, you can always use an online converter first and then input information with the right unit of measurement in the system. I cannot stress this enough. This is a very common mistake, and it has a huge impact in terms of your carbon footprint. And last but not least, as I said, you might not have all the data for all those sections, and that is completely fine, especially if this is the very first time that you're doing something like this. But please aim to make improvements over time, especially in terms of data collection. If this is the first time that you're doing this, you might realize that you need to set up certain processes internally in your organization so you're able to collect this data more easily. If you don't have primary data for certain sections and you're missing some pieces, for example, for a couple of months, let's say you don't have electricity data, you can always use proxy data. You can also use extrapolation or any other methodology that you see fit. In the carbon calculator guide that I showed you, that is part of the landing page, for every single section, we're telling you what to do if you have incomplete data or if you don't have all that information. So please take a look at that guide. It will be really helpful. So that is it from my side. I'm going to stop sharing so I can check if there are any specific questions that we might be able to. Okay. We have a question that reads, we have our own carbon footprint verified, but our financial year runs differently to Robertson's. Are we able to use this information? That is a very good question. Yes, you're able to use that information. If you already know your scopes 1, 2, and 3, just select yes to the question. You will be taken to the very short report, and then use the comment area to explain that your data has been already verified. Just add a note on that and say that it corresponds to your own financial year, and please add details of what that year entails. But that is totally doable. There is a similar question from Lindsay. We have already calculated our emissions, but they're based on January, December. Will that be a problem, or will we have to do calculations for the specific range? So at the moment, the system reads January to December. However, if you use any any other financial year, feel free to input the information that you already have, but add a note in the comment area explaining that it corresponds to your own year. We're not expecting suppliers to do an entirely different calculation if you already know your yearly emissions, okay? We're trying to make this process as simple as possible for you. We have a similar question from Chantel. We have sent out our ESG report for 2022 and 2023. Do you need us to use this calculator? Yes, please. If you already have your report, it means that you already know your scopes 1, 2, and 3. So simply add that information in the system using the short version and apportion what corresponds to Robertson. That's it. We have a similar question that reads that they have already worked out their scope 1, 2, and 3, showing targets and actions to reduce their carbon footprint. Will we still have to use the carbon calculator? The answer is similar. If you already know your scopes 1, 2, and 3, simply use the short version of the report where you can just input your final figure and do the apportionment. The idea is to have most of the supply chain using the same platform so we can analyze data more efficiently. A question from Shirley. When you say previous financial year, do you mean 2022 or 2023? Okay, I think Martin has answered that question. Another question says, is it possible to calculate scope 3 emissions alone rather than doing everything? You can complete only certain sections of the calculator, but I wouldn't recommend to do that because you would be leaving out an important proportion of your footprint. Therefore, when you apportion data to Robertson will not be getting the accurate picture. So please try to input as much data as you can in the system. Can you send out a link to where we can sign up to this, please? Yes. I will share the link right now. This is the link of the landing page, but we will also follow up with an email after this webinar. We're using the government website. Are you using the same? I'm not sure what do you mean by the government website, but we're definitely using the government's DEFRA conversion factors to calculate carbon emissions based on the data that you provide. There is a final question that reads, are Robertson's going to require embodied carbon measurements of products or of a specific products as well?
Stephanie, I can answer that. Where we require them for projects, yes, we will be looking for EPDs to be produced, but that will be a product project basis. This, in general, we're just trying to capture an overall view of what the scope emissions are for newer suppliers. So where we've got other requirements, we will contact you directly regarding that.
Thank you very much, Martin. And I think we've covered most of the questions. Thanks for your help in the chat as well. If you have any other questions, please do not hesitate to contact Abby. If you have any questions, doubts, or issues with the carbon calculator, there's a specific email for that, which will be circulated as part of the slides as well. Martin and Abby, any final words before we close?
Can I just take the opportunity to thank yourself, Stephanie, and the Supply Chain School for your support, and to thank everybody for their time. We're almost bang on the hour, so we've not encroached into the rest of your working day. So thanks very much. We do appreciate your support in trying to get us to the position to capture this. I make no apology of reinforcing that it is going to be a mandatory requirement for all of our preferred supply chain to at least report scope 1 and 2. If you can report scope 3, that would be appreciated. The more information we get, the better. However, our commitment back to you is that we have support internally through Abby, myself, and the rest of the team, along with the supply chain school, to try and alleviate any issues you may have in doing so. So thanks very much for your time and attention. We will send out copies of links, copies of the questions with answers against them, and we will also reissue you the link to get on the carbon tool and start recording your information. And if we can look for you to start filling that information in line with the deadline. If you've got any issues in meeting that deadline, please let Abby know, and we will look to see what we can do to try and assist. But if you can try and meet that deadline, it would be really appreciated. So once again, thanks very much for your time and attention, and look forward to speaking to you in the future.
Thanks very much, everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.